Thanks.
Okay, so I'm slowly opening the chat and going through that in a second. On your last slide, you had this take-home message for IoT designers to consider environmental impacts and take them into account. Can you maybe say a little bit how difficult it was for you to do these assessments, and what exactly would you expect an IoT researcher or IoT developer to do, and how do you even start that if you're in a commercial setting or academic setting?
So I will be completely honest on that part, and thanks for asking that question, because I think it's really a mess. That's at least the way I see it. It's really complicated. Like the expertises needs time to grow for this, even though this is research and topics that have risen like more than 20 years ago. But it was difficult first because the tools that we provide us are like not complete, and it's not at all integrated in the design flow of electronics. Either it could be at the chip design level or at the system design. It's not at all integrated. And I've done all my like master, like all my electronical engineering in electronics, and I know because of that that it's not at all integrated in the design flow. So I think it's difficult, and it needs people first to get aware of this, and then try to dig into it. But it takes time. That's true.
You at the beginning you had this the table and figures from Malmodin's paper from 2018, the impact assessment paper. Um, so what I didn't understand yet is whether your work actually contradict, or whether the impacts are different for the IoT environment than what Malmodin discovered back then. And there was a second question I wanted to ask here. Yeah, how do you consider the lifetime of devices? So, in particular, in the IoT, you have very short-lived devices. You had this example of a smartwatch, which probably is being used on average maybe for a year or 2 years or something like that. But you also have in the IoT framework devices that are being used once and then thrown away. So, how do you
Yeah.
consider that?
So I will first answer the first question, then pick up the second one. For the first question, the pie chart, I think your question was about that. The pie chart that I presented for Malmodin, this is not considering the IoT stuff, but in his paper, he mentioned and he did the work to try to see what would be the impact of the IoT. And actually, the result that he gets about like 150 to 100 megatons CO2 equivalent is the cross that I put here, but it's in 2015. Okay. So what our result said compared to theirs is like in the range of the order of magnitude. This seems like this could be one of the possible scenarios that we present here. The main difference is that it's targeting a single year at a single point of time, and for a given number of devices deployed. The advantage of presenting things in this way is that you can see the range of possibilities and better understand what is inducing what impact, if I can compare. But for example, it means that yes, if the deployment is effectively following the Statista curve, okay, and that we have a deployment scenario which is close to like the second one scenario regarding the complexity of hardware profile, it seems coherent with what Malmodin predicted. And that's also something that is quite striking, is to say, okay, if we are on the left panel, okay, that's fine, things look good. But if you look the point of Malmodin here, in 2015, it means that it's more likely that we are in the second or third scenario rather than the first one. And what is really interesting to see, at least to me, it's the trends. Look at the trends for the whole ICT production, not IoT, all ICT production. We should follow the pink trend, and the trend upwards here are the trend only for producing IoT. And so this raises really that question to say, obviously we can discuss afterward, IoT can also bring a lot of good, a lot of optimizations in system, a lot of maybe substitution at some point. So yes, there are positive sides to IoT. But here, the first question is to say, for the direct impacts, the impacts that we know that are about to be generated when we produce IoT, we need also to put on something which is coherent with environmental targets, because if we do not do that, it will only be a bet on the future, saying we just hope that it will save more than it produces. But how can you do this bet if we cannot quantify? But maybe other people have things to add.
So there are the two questions by Danny that I want to read out then. So he's asking why carbon footprint is a good measure, and how do we consider the impact of certain mineral uses of indicators that are more related to land use of the production of IoT components, and to what extent we can take recycling into account? Do you have opinions on that?
For the first one, so that's why we try to open to more indicators in the use case for the LCA of wireless power transfer that we provided. Indeed, you are totally right, and considering more indicators is clearly needed, but it's also something which is even more difficult to quantify than carbon footprint, which, to my opinion, highlight also the challenge that we are facing in modeling these impacts. So yes, that should be done, and we are trying also to quantify that, but it was not considered in the framework because too much complexity at that time. But it's indeed a very good point. The impact of recycling components is also a very interesting topic, and we actually discussed quite a lot with recyclers and people from the end of life phases, which highlighted that two main problems with IoT would be, the first one is the cost of node. If it's a low cost, it might be more interesting not to take them back and just put new ones, like the cost of maintenance to send people getting the IoT nodes back could be just higher than just letting the node in the nature. So that could be really an issue. Also, they said that the diversification of the flows introduced by IoT, as it's going to be ubiquitous electronics for very, very different kind of that could be for textile, but also within objects and a lot of things that will modify and widen the flows for recycling, which will really makes harder the recycling of e-waste. But indeed, that was not considered in the framework. We only try to put this discussion forward in the discussion section, but not modeled it. And yeah, that's true. If you want that we go deeper in that discussion, I'm also open. But I think there are also other questions. I saw not necessarily. The question is self-contained, so maybe
there was
Danny,
just,
I don't know.
I asked Danny if he wants to open his mic and join the discussion or not. I see one more question by Shireen. Shireen, do you want to unmute, or can you unmute? I don't see you right now. No, she's on listen only. Okay.
Yeah.
So Shireen is asking.
Maybe sorry, I interrupted. Maybe to answer your second question that I didn't answer regarding the lifetime.
Yeah, I would have been coming back to it, but Shireen asked it as well, basically.
Okay. You think that you could be including now?
Maybe you can fit them together. So the impact of security, that's more a topic for me. I actually give a keynote on that at a date workshop in 2 weeks. So maybe we can talk about it separately, Shireen. But the lifetime discussion, I think, is interesting, Thibault.
Yeah, completely. And this is even more important in the IoT for IoT devices. Just to make the point very clear, in the framework, there is no question about lifetime, because what we try to do is to quantify the environmental impacts, whatever the lifetime. So we just assume that it's a one-shot production, that there is no maintenance to replace something or whatever. And why it is important to account for the lifetime, it is when you put the production next to the use phase, because there comes really the question, how long are you using this? And so what is the relative share between the production and the use phase? As we only focus on the production, here we really considered the, I would say, the one-shot production of the IoT device. But indeed, because of a software update, or even like degrading of batteries and aging of components that happen in practice, the effective lifetime might not be the theoretical lifetime. And so indeed, you might need to change some part of your IoT node or replace it completely. And this is indeed a very interesting and complex question. But the framework only focus on the first stages of the life cycle. So yes, that's a problem, which is, by the way, not only environmental problems, it's also linked to the business model of IoT, meaning, again, that if you are doing cheap nodes such that it's easier to replace completely the node compared to taking it back and repair it, obviously the impact will be different. But it's also linked to how IoT is going to be used, what business model is being considered.
From the case studies that you investigated, do you have an idea what the ratio between emissions during production and end of life versus use time are?
So we had there is that question. So usually the end of life, at least how it is modeled today, is very low impact in terms of carbon, not in ecotoxicity or other stuff, but in terms of carbon, this is usually very low. Even though we have also the problem of like 80% of the e-waste are not handled properly, and so it could raise question. But anyway. So the end of life is usually not a hotspot in the modeling of environmental impacts for electronics. However, for the use phase, there is the use phase of the IoT nodes, but it should also be included all the data transfer that are done to the cloud, and maybe sometimes also cloud computations. This we did not carry out. And the answer is usually that for main powered IoT device, usually as you have less constraints on the mobility and battery lifetime, etc., the use phase is usually dominating. But for mobile IoT nodes, it really depends on what type of nodes it is. But so that's why now we really try to include the use phase and more indicators, not to being stuck only with production.
All
so
right.
I know that it's incomplete answers, but this is a vast challenge to model. So it's on the way.
Okay, pretty cool. Are there more questions from the audience? Lennart, please go.
Just a quick question to maybe clarify this. Maybe you have said this before. So the amount of resources going into the production phase for IoT, do you assume them to be virgin resources, like freshly sourced? So okay, so there's no like kind of ratio between like maybe recovered or recycled materials. Along those lines, do you have like a feeling for if that is actually something that could be feasible, so like complete, I think maybe cradle to cradle models where you would kind of like repurpose those, is that feasible? And if not, is it due to like maybe economic models, or is it due to like just you cannot, like the amount of resources is too small or something like this?
So I would say that modeling this is possible, because I would say that yes, modeling this is possible. The question to what extent it really shows what happened in practice is another question, which is far more difficult in my opinion. But from my understanding on this topic, the issue with electronics materials is that, yes, obviously for casing, for example, you could say, okay, this is aluminum or whatever, it has been like recycled and it's not virgin aluminum. I totally agree. And I think that's what happened in practice. So, okay, there are also issues with like recycling and that kind of stuff, but all good. However, for electronics, we face another issue, which is like the purity, the semiconductor grade, which is used in like foundries and which is used to produce electronic components, is not industrial grade. It is like high purity grade. And this is really really hard to obtain from recycled materials. Obviously, in foundries, they are like recycling waters for ultra pure water and that kind of stuff. For the materials that are used inside the process flow, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, but that's really what I know from that so far, is that usually the level of purity is so high that it cannot be refurbished material. And actually, this is also a gap in the modeling of environmental impact of electronic, is that this is usually not covered. This is usually taken as industrial grade and not as semiconductor grade, which is a main difference.
That means, like in many other fields, if we want to build products with a reduced impact, we should actually focus on reuse rather than on recycling.
Yeah, exactly. Before reuse is better. So first is like not use, and then the reuse and the recycling. Indeed, and there are also conflicting trends when you discuss with people designing like foundries and then with people that are recycling. There is a conflicting trend, because everything is pushing toward miniaturization. We want to go smaller, more integrated, everything smaller, more. This is really the trend we see in electronics. But recyclers, what they say is the more you put some valuable materials in a system, the more it is interesting economically, but also easier to recover the materials. And so on one side, from the design, we are going towards more integration and miniaturization. But on the recycler side, they face a really huge difficulty to still be able to recover these materials, as they are in less and less quantity. So they have to concentrate the flows. But we also see with IoT, for instance, that the flows are more and more diverse. And so it's also more and more complicated to have concentrated flows. At least that's the understanding I have from the discussion with them.
Yeah, interesting. All right. I don't see any more questions popping up. So
if we have just 1 minute, I would maybe be interested to see if Danny can open the mic, because it was maybe contrary argument. So I would really be interesting to.
Yeah, I'm very happy with your answers, basically. So I do not have any additional questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, okay, thanks.
All right, thanks a lot, Thibault. Very nice presentation. Yeah, I mean, we see each other soon enough, I think, on Friday, probably, Thibault. So thanks for being with us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I want to quickly announce the next presentation that is coming up here, and that will be by Dr. Stefan Schiffner and Professor Bettina Behrendt from the Leibniz Institute and from the University of Münster. One piece of a puzzle: computational limits and opportunities of anonymity for whistleblower protection. So we are following up a little bit on the presentation we had 2 weeks ago on whistleblowing and what infrastructures are needed for that. And I hope to see many of you again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.